Hello everyone. Unless I misconfigured something, you should be able to hear me now and also see what we have on our screen here. So today we are looking at one particular issue here for WinForms. And yeah, do you want to talk about it? Do you want to give us an introduction for what this is?
Yeah, sure. So this GA Plus has a support for converting pixel formats for bitmaps. And so this API is really about exposing that. So if you scroll down a little bit, there's a little surprise for ML there of the usage and the results of that API. And if you scroll down a little bit more, there's a link to like the updated API proposal.
Gotcha. So this is just P invoking into GDI, right? We're not actually having an implementation behind that, right?
Yes.
And ignore my ignorance, but like who is it? Just completeness, or is there actually people that care about dithering in the year 2024?
This is complete. So this everything in the palette type and the dither type comes from the GDI plus enumerations that are there exposing that.
Yeah, no, what I meant is like, are we exposing this just for completeness reasons, or are there actually customer scenarios that need dithering in the current year? Because I mean, dithering to me sounds like something that was relevant like in the 1980s or 1990s. So I'm just wondering like how much we care about dithering in today's world.
I believe we looked at this more for completeness. I'm not really 100% sure how many people actually use or want the dithering. There is, in the author's original post, they did point out that there were some people wondering about how to use this, and they pointed to like a Stack Overflow that had a lot of likes.
And notably, dithering has a wide range of variants from probably what you're more thinking about, like classical 1990s dithering, and what's used in more modern image processing, which is almost just a kind of basic compression, and can be used to reduce banding issues and other scenarios. For example, if you're doing mobile, low resolution, if you're doing emulation back compat for there's emulators out there that exist for various older gaming devices that people use dithering techniques on still, and some of those actually run on WinForms, interestingly enough. So there's actually quite a broad range of support for that stuff still, even in the modern world.
And so this is part of the regular system we're drawing, right? So this is basically the Windows-specific thing, right? We don't have to provide a cross-plot implementation for bitmap, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. And then all of those enum names are presumably coming from Win32, basically?
Yes, those are coming from Win32. We dropped the prefix, so really, in Win32, it's like palette type custom, palette type fixed BW,
right.
And then the same for dither type. We just dropped those prefixes and kept the rest.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then I think BW is probably black and white, presumably.
Mm-hmm.
And then the dither type is basically terminology that makes sense if you understand dithering, presumably, because I don't know what any of these mean.
Yes.
Presumably the 4x4 and 8x8 is kind of a representation for like how large the pixel area is that they're looking into. So yeah, that makes sense to me.
For BW, do we want to expand that to black-white or black and white?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Like, I mean, BW is pretty much. I think if you do pictures, it's kind of if it doesn't mean black and white, I'd be like, okay, let's rename it. But black and white is pretty much, I think, widely understood. But yeah, I mean, there's some value in saying it just matches what Win32 is called, but I think spelling it out is also fine. Like it's not going to cause any confusion.
I think this is one of those cases where if Jeremy were here, he'd probably suggest we do it to follow the design guidelines.
Yeah. We would just say black and white.
It slightly more explicit.
Yeah. So what does custom mean in this context? Like when you say palette type.custom, are you passing in the palette then, or what happens when you do that?
So this is it would be provided by the user if they were to do palette type custom, and we have some APIs that allow them to create their own color palette.
Oh, it's basically this guy here, I guess. Yes.
Yeah.
Are we missing an entry from palette type optimal, which should be value 1 in between custom and black-white?
So we decided to make, so if you scroll down a little bit, there's an API for specifically, sorry, a little more up.
Sorry.
The last one in color palette cast, because that our optimal color palette GDI Plus asks for a little bit more information, such as like how many colors you want and the bitmap that is going to base like the best colors from. So we decided to make that its own method.
Okay, so and WinForms is going to map the managed enum to the internal GDI Plus enum, since they're not going to line up exactly.
Is there any output for the palette type, or is palette type the enum always an input? It's always an input, right?
Sorry, to Tanner's question, yes, we will map those correctly to GDI Plus and MO. I missed your question, sorry.
So what I'm thinking is, so in the similar vein, you said you have create optimal palette, and this way you don't have the palette type optimal, right? Mm-hmm. And then for like in the same vein, it seems like why would you need custom? Because I mean, custom is only valid if you pass in a non-null palette, presumably, right? So what I'm thinking is, instead of doing that, you would just have two overloads of convert format, one that takes the palette type and one that takes the actual palette, and then that implies custom. And that would only work, of course, if palette type is an input. If you ever have to return what palette was used, then maybe you still need custom to reflect that, but I don't think you do, right?
Well, so palette type doesn't necessarily say what the palette is. Even fixed BW isn't strictly speaking black-white, it's two color, and you can customize the palette to be like, let's say you wanted red and white instead, or even like red and blue. It's really just for a 1 bit per pixel palette that you can end up customizing. And then custom is like, it's a fully custom palette type where you could have an arbitrary number of bits per pixel.
So you're saying basically it makes sense to pass in, so if you pass in a palette here, like a color palette that is not null, it still makes sense to have other values from custom. Is that what you're saying?
Right, because you can, for example, say, I want fixed BW, but I want to customize it so that instead of black and white, which is the default, I want red and blue.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense. And so color palette is an existing type that we already have?
Yes.
And the existing type is only private constructors then, presumably? Yeah, I guess so. Both of them are private. Yep, they didn't exist before, yeah. Yeah.
Sorry, color palette is an existing type. Palette type is what we're adding here.
Yeah, no, I'm saying color palette, you can only construct it. Today you can't construct one. It's always given to you. Because all the constructors are private. Like, this is literally the only constructors that this type would now have, right? As far as I can tell. But I guess this one here is a factory method, so these three basically is the only way to get one. And it's returned currently, so is that bitmap.palette basically or something like that? Like, how do you get one today? Yeah, I guess it's an image. Yeah, image has a palette property. So what does it mean if I set a palette on the bitmap? If I say bitmap.palette equals color palette, whatever. Is that even valid, or is that something that is not what's happening here? I guess what I'm asking is, how is that different from saying convert format?
Sorry, can you repeat your question? So color palette, you can get that from doing, it's a property on image.
Yeah, and it's settable, right? So what does it mean to set a color palette on an image as opposed to calling convert format?
One doesn't actually change the underlying format. So if you had so I don't know if you're familiar with like the original Game Boy Color, just as an example. When you started it up with one of the original Game Boy games, you could actually, on the intro screen, push a combination of buttons and it would change the palette. And so the actual image and the pixel data that it contains hasn't changed. It's just the mapping of that data to the underlying palette. So if you had, for example, an image that was 1 bit per pixel, and your palette was specified as black and white, you could swap that palette out for an equivalent, let's say, red and green. And instead of displaying black and white, it would display as red and green. It's not actually converted the palette, it's just interpreting the palette differently.
Gotcha. So you could imagine a picture.
Format,
yeah, I get it. Yeah.
Yeah. Whereas convert format will actually do the transformation of the data, so it's no longer reinterpreted. It is actually correct for the new format.
So I could have a 24-bit JPEG, and then I call convert format, and then I get like a 3-color palette, and so it basically changes the image and forces it into these 3 colors rather than just changing 24-bit color to be projected to some other color scheme, basically. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, so then I think, unless somebody else has any other questions, I mean, I think the only suggestion that we then have is just this part here. Unless I missed something. Yeah, there's lots of white noise in the background. Yeah, somebody's complaining about the audio quality. I'm sorry. It's my shitty mic. Actually, that's a good question. Someone says, I see params color array. Should that be params with only span of color? Given, yeah.
Yeah, we actually expose the colors in the color palette as an array, so having a read-only span kind of defeats the purpose, the performance purpose there, because we need to do 2 array, so we don't really want to add that.
Oh, so basically the color palette has an entries property that returns a color array. Does that return the same array that you pass in, or does it allocate an array every time you ask for the entries? Because the other WinForms APIs do that, right? Where the property gives you a new array every time you ask.
That's the same array.
It's the same array, I see. Yeah, and entries has shipped, right? And yeah, it has shipped since .NET Framework v1, so that ship has literally sailed. Yep, I guess then that's it. Someone else says fixed black and white is kind of misleading given that the user can specify other colors. I mean, I guess, but what else would you call it? Fixed 2 color?
Call it 2 color, but I think in this case the matching the underlying GDI plus is better, and it's fairly typical for some schemas to actually interpret to actually expose it as black and white instead of 1-bit or 2 color or anything like that. It's one of those like domain specific oddities that exists in many image processing libraries.
Yeah, one person says fixed bitonal. I don't think we're doing people any favors by doing that. That's just, getting the name slightly more correct for at the expense of having a name that nobody understands. So I assume black and white doesn't mean 1-bit, right? It probably means, I guess, grayscale effectively, so 1 byte. Is that kind of how to think about it?
No. It's 1-bit.
Oh, really?
It's 1-bit. So it's specifically one of 2 colors.
Interesting. All right.
And by default, that is black and white if you don't specify anything else.
Yeah. And then for the halftone, it's all bits, right? 8 bits, 27 bits, 64 bits.
Yes.
The numbers all seem weird to me, but it's it is what it is.
The actual XML docs will explain what each one does in more detail.
See, the naive person in me thinks there should all be multiples of 8 or something, but apparently that's not the case. Yeah, so the only thing I wanted to ask earlier, which I didn't, so what happens when you specify a threshold for, it says alpha threshold %. What does that mean? Are you overlaying the new image over the old one, or what happens?
So it specifies which pixels in the source bitmap will map to the transparent color in the converted bitmap. Value of 0 specifies none, a value of 100 specifies that any pixel that is not fully opaque will map to the transparent color.
Any pixel that isn't fully opaque will match to the transparent pixel.
Yeah, so it's basically saying that so if you're going, for example, from a transparent to a non-transparent image,
Right.
you have to specify how things will work, and so this tells you if something is less transparent than this, treat it as fully transparent. If it's more than this, treat it as non-transparent.
And percent really means value between 0 and 100, not between 0 and 1.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And are we using percentages often? Because I mean, normally we do just factors, right? I'm not used to percent APIs literally taking a value of between 1 and 100. It's usually between 0 and 1.
This matches how GDI Plus actually takes it.
Oh, later. Okay. Yeah, fine. I guess that makes sense.
Yeah, if you were to do between 0 and 1, some people might get it wrong. And even if you were to scale it up to 100 for GDI Plus, that's going to cause some rounding error for users.
Right. Oh well. Again, it's an API that shipped 20 years ago, 30 years ago.
Also, to answer your earlier question, the bits in halftone, or the numbers in halftone aren't the number of bits, but it appears to be the number of colors. So halftone 8 is 4 bits per pixel, allowing 8 colors.
Oh god, okay.
And halftone 27, yeah.
Obviously.
Halftone 27 allows a total of 36 colors, because it's 3 intensities across 16 colors of the system palette. So it has a well-defined meaning that makes sense in the context of this, but the numbers themselves aren't intuitive without the box.
Yep, I guess that's what it is then. And yep. Yep. No, that makes sense to me. Unless somebody else has anything else to add, I just mark it as approved. Going. Done. Is there anything else you want to look at in read forms while we're at it? Otherwise, we can probably end early, or we can do something else.
No, I think we'll come back with like the generics that I was talking about earlier.
That makes sense. Alright, then anybody else has something easy to review? Normally Tanner doesn't have any issues finding one.
Not sure we have quorum.
Oh, did Steven already drop? Yeah, Steven already dropped. Yeah, then I think we can just conclude early. That's fine with me.
Yeah, if we had more than just you and I remaining from the main team, API review team, I'd have one, but...
Yeah, that makes sense. Alright, then thanks everyone, and then I see you next Thursday, no, actually this Thursday. This upcoming Thursday I have a review as well. So I see you guys on Thursday.